Hi there, and welcome back, everyone, to Automotive Logistics and Supply Chain Live. And to those of you in North America, a good morning, and thanks for finally joining here. A bunch of late risers here who probably couldn't be bothered to get up at 3 or 4 in the morning when we kicked off, but we're glad to have you now online for this session as well. So I'm Christopher Ludwig, Editor-in-Chief here at Ultima Media and Automotive Logistics, and hosting, along with my colleagues, the event today. I'm glad that many of you could join for this session, because I think clearly this is an important topic given the times that we're in. Spotlight on supply chain, optimizing capacity planning. I certainly don't envy anyone whose job it has been over the past 6 months to manage demand planning, capacity, and order management, given the volatility that we've faced, both in the early phases and later phases of the crisis and now recovery. Fair to say it's been quite a bit of whiplash, but I think it's really put a spotlight on the importance of optimizing capacity planning, communication, and how we can work with forecasting tools and visibility to improve the supply chain. And that's some of which we're going to discuss today, alongside a great panel from industry today, which I'd like to bring on and introduce now. So very pleased to welcome Jeff Estes, who's a General Manager of Parts Supply at Toyota Motor North America, who indeed plays an important role in the capacity planning side for Toyota's inbound as well as service parts logistics. Greg Megerian, Director of Logistics for Adient, who oversees global logistics for this important tier supplier, and certainly will have a lot to add on this topic as well. And I'm very pleased to welcome Ron Glowinsky, Vice President of Global Sales at CNW, a very important premium freight and expediter who plays a big role in the global supply chain for automotive, and certainly knows a thing or two about volatility in the supply chain as well. So welcome to all of our guests, from Tel Aviv, from Texas, from Detroit, for joining our global conference here today.
Thank you.
Good morning, good evening. Thanks for having me.
A pleasure to have you. So the format today for our session today is a panel discussion. Again, just a reminder to our audience, I'll put the questions through, but at the same time, please continue to send your comments and questions, and I will address them as I can throughout the session. And so we'll flow just in that way. So I'd like to start. I'm going to maybe start with you, Jeff, put you in the hot seat, and follow up with Greg. You know, forecasting demand and planning capacity, as I mentioned, was always a challenge, but this year I'm sure has been one of the toughest any of us would have faced. So let's just start with a bit of grounding of where we are now in terms of how stable or unstable this sort of planning is, given the phase from restart to ramp up and this now. So if we can start with Jeff, and then I'd like to hear from Greg on that.
Sure, Christopher. I think in September, we in North America for our production plants, we're pretty much back to pre-COVID volume planning. So from a design and a planning perspective, I would say we're very much, most plants are at where they were before pre-COVID levels, and a few are just actually even a little bit above. So I think, we've all lived through, from March until now. We finally got back in September to a more, I want to say, normal, supply chain design standpoint. But, obviously operationally, we're still struggling with many things.
Mm. And Greg, what about from Adient's point of view?
Yeah, I would agree with Jeff. I mean, I think that, coming out of the shutdown through, the middle of May, things were hectic in a different way. We kind of went through the fire drills every week of which plants are starting this week, and everyone says they're starting, but you knew they weren't, but you had a plan for them to start, right? And so we ran that gamut, and then June, July, we saw pretty steady volumes, not everywhere, but pretty steady. But I think at this point now we're pretty much back to pre-COVID.
Mm-hmm. I mean, for those of us who followed on the live stream hour that we did early on, there was so much discussion around the sort of mismatch between the call-offs that we were, the EDI messaging and stuff coming from OEMs versus call-offs, but that seems to have regulated pretty relatively quickly.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I think that more of what we're seeing now, I might be fast forwarding a little bit, but more of what we're seeing now is catch up to what the last several months has done. I think with our supply base, with our carrier base, that's kind of where we're at now.
Yeah. If we look at the kind of the efficiency of the network or the utilization of like Greg, in terms of truck and transport assets. How does this compare to pre-COVID? Is it again kind of, has it come back to levels? Are we less efficient, more utilized?
It's tough to say. I think we're probably less efficient right now, and that's because of the unknown. We're seeing post-COVID, we're seeing suppliers that are having difficulties. We are, in some cases, we've switched suppliers because the current supplier was having difficulties post-COVID. So there's that whole aspect. And then there's, on the other side, there's, our own plants that are struggling, and our own sister plants, our own supplier plants that are struggling as well. So, I don't want to say we're as efficient as we were because of those urgencies. And then also the carrier base as well. I mean, we're having, it seems like in the past month, we're having a lot more carrier call-offs, which just creates inefficiencies throughout.
Great. Jeff, from Toyota's point of view, does that sound similar, or what are you facing there?
Yeah, I mean, I think Greg's right. I think again, from a design standpoint, we pretty much are using most of the resources that we were using before, and we constantly, even before COVID, are looking at our trailer efficiency, and we call it cubic meter per vehicle that we build, right? And if you look at that, we're pretty pleased with our August results just came in, and I think we're tracking back to regain some I don't know if you say cost effectiveness or whatever you want to say. So I think we're looking for the rest of the year to continue to be strong, but we're really pleased with where we're at, with August's results, with that efficiency for us.
Okay, great. Ron, if I can bring you into the conversation, from your point of view, how do you compare the instability or stability in the supply chain today compared to, say, earlier points in the crisis? I mean, there were obviously points when it was much more extreme, but where is it today when you look across the supply chain and the customers that you work with?
Yeah, definitely it was in the extreme side where so many flights were canceled and there was no space to move cargo at all. This was really challenging. Also, whatever is left, the airlines that still moved, their prices went up to the roof, and it was really challenging. Nowadays, there is more capacity. It's not back to normal. There are much more flights, or many more flights, but it still is not as it used to be before the crisis, and the prices are still high. So it's challenging, but less challenging. At the same time, let's not forget that in April, May, the demand was very low, and suddenly the demand is very high at the moment. So August was one of the best months ever for moving urgent shipments in the automotive industry. Because it came from zero to normal in a very short time.
So that bit of good news for Ron, maybe not such good news for Greg or Jeff, tells us perhaps something about some of the strains in some parts of the supply chain. Greg or Jeff, do you have a view, or are you looking at areas where you see some risks of some supply shortages or strains on capacity that need to be addressed? Maybe I'll start with Greg on that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we're seeing over the past probably 2 months, we're seeing some capacity constraints through the Laredo corridor. We're seeing it through El Paso as well. Not too much anywhere else on the domestic trucking market. On ocean, heavy constraints from Asia into North America. I would say more so in the past couple of weeks.
Yeah, Christopher, you want me to reply as well?
Yeah, please. Yeah,
sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah, so I think Greg's right. Fortunately for us on the global side, we've not had a lot of need for expedite. I think again our demand is pretty stable. The supply is the issue, right? And again we monitor that daily, and we have crisis staff that are supporting those supply disruptions, and we're making decisions about backup and where that backup comes, whether it's globally or another tier supplier within North America. And then once we make those decisions, then right, it's a matter of securing the freight, whether it be truck or whether it be air. And we haven't had any real issues with connecting those and making sure we can recover, from a logistics partner standpoint. And of course, we are struggling with some of our tier one suppliers that, are just, constantly battling manpower issues and maybe some component issues and stuff like that. But I think we're really pleased overall based upon, our operational condition day in and day out.
Is any of that leading to or potentially leading to price rises, increases? I mean, Ron indicated that the air freight side was more expensive than normal. If we look at things like the trucking market and carrier rates and stuff like that, because of that capacity situation, is that stable or is that kind of higher than we would expect right now?
I would say it's stable. We have not, had any real tough conversations with our partners about prices and costs, and since the shutdown and restart, we kind of went through that commercial discussion, during that time when we were all trying to figure out how long this was going to last and what that means from each company's condition. But as we restarted, that really hasn't been a discussion item as far as cost increases. And as I mentioned earlier, I think we're pretty pleased with our efficiency as well as where we're at to our budget year to date.
Right.
I think one more point that we have to look into is China. China is a big source of material for the automotive, and when the flights were canceled and the demand for medical supply went high, it was very difficult to move the parts out of China. Also, India in some periods were very challenging to move freight in and out of India. Those two big countries definitely challenging, but now they are back. We see that they are back to close to normal, let's say.
We've definitely been tracking different points of the crisis when that was particularly acute. What about for Greg and Jeff to start? What about Mexico? I mean, that obviously had been slower to restart and reopen at a phase, and had been an area of concern. Again, are we below kind of run rates and capacity there? Is that being felt, or is this starting to catch up as well? I'll start with you, Jeff.
Yeah, Mexico, I think, was really difficult to kind of understand, initially compared to some of the North American condition. I think we struggled for the first, I think we restarted in May, and we were all still struggling, for the first few weeks or month or so there, just to understand what the supply condition was going to be coming out of Mexico for, U.S. production. But I think since that time, again, each plant, each company, each government is kind of managing very similarly, right? And we have been pretty pleased operationally. Again, plant by plant, we have struggles within U.S. and Mexico, and I know they're limited some on what staffing and what kind of headcount they can be. But again, all in all, I think we're pleased with all the North American effort to try to get things back to normal.
Yeah, and I'll agree with Jeff. I mean, it was the same for us. I think part of that struggle and not knowing when shutdowns were happening, when plants were coming up, is because we didn't really know what was. It seems like Mexico was on a little bit of a lag from the U.S. just in COVID hitting them in the first place, right? And so we didn't know when those plants would start up, and if Mexico supplier is not going to be working, then the U.S. plant's not going to be lasting more than a week, right? So that was the concern at first, but at this point, I think the U.S. and Mexico are pretty much on the same page as far as supply.
Yeah. Okay. And Ron, when you look at, because I mean, you do a fair amount of business in and out of Mexico, and I think of it as a bit of a barometer for that stability. Are you seeing for those record month, was Mexico part of that? Is Mexico kind of below where it had been in the past?
Definitely, because we see big lane of trucks in the border. We see a bigger demand for charter flights. So we move more charter flights from Mexico to the US. Let's not forget that there is a big percentage of people affected by COVID, and they are not at work, and they are staying at home. And of course, it influences also the manufacturing. So there are some delays, and we see more demand for expedited freight out of Mexico. Let's not forget also that from July, there is a new agreement, USMCA, that replaced NAFTA. And this is also some implication on the commercial relationship between Mexico and the US.
Yeah, but that's certainly something we're tracking carefully as well, and interested to see how that continues to develop. If we were to sort of, I'm not promising that we're leaving COVID behind completely yet, but if we were to sort of maybe to try to move to the next chapter, but to say what are some of the key lessons that you've taken from this crisis that you will or want to apply kind of going forward? So not just the clearly operational changes we need to make and adjust, but if you were to look across your network, your partnerships, systems, etc., is there anything in particular that has come to mind? And maybe I'll start with you on that, Greg.
I think it just reemphasizes the importance of relationships, right? I mean, we have a high, I guess it's all relative, but we have a high freight spend. And so I think relationships are extremely important to us, right? So there had to be flexibility in the network with our carrier base. We had a situation, obviously, where we were shut down and we had to know where our trucks were going. We had to offload them somewhere, right? At either one of our yards, one of our warehouses, one of our carrier yards. There has to be that flexibility there. But overall, I mean, a crisis is a crisis is a crisis. And I feel like over the past 10 years, we've had, Hurricane Katrina and Rita. We had a hurricane hitting today. We have, floods in Mexico, floods in the US. There's so many different crises that happen now. And, this one's much different, but they're kind of all the same when you take a step back and look, right? You have to know where your trucks are. You have to be able to manage it. You have to have communication. You have to know and have those relationships with your partners to make sure you can get yourself out of whatever event is happening.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, anything more from Toyota's side?
I 100% agree with Greg. I think from a mutual trust and respect, which is very fundamental for us, that we really strengthen our relationships with both our logistics partners as well as our, tier one suppliers through this. And, it's been a lot better communication. We focused, I think I mentioned earlier, we had to figure out how to stop first, right? And then we had to figure out the commercial discussion and had lots of tough, shared sacrifice discussions there. And then, of course, as Greg mentioned, then it was about restart planning and are you really going to go? Are you really going to go? And then we finally did go, right? And so through that, I think we learned a lot about communication and how to, take that and share that with all stakeholders. And, again, everybody's trying to, I don't know, I guess, be at least cost competitive or try to have some kind of profit, vitality or business vitality. So I think we strengthened that. The only other point I would make on top of what Greg mentioned is, again, we had a monthly kind of cyclic process that we normally do our route designs, but what we learned through the lower demand or the no demand periods, both on the service and export and North American side, is that, we didn't look at our efficiency as frequently as we needed to. And so based on trying to protect some of that, company business performance, financial performance, then we really started looking at our processes to understand how we could make those decisions. And as Greg said, flexibility, right? And how you be nimble. I use that word, and it was all about being nimble and making sure that you're being as efficiently to meet the lead times that we needed to meet. So no, it was good. We all learned a lot, and knock on wood, we're coming out to the new normal, right? Which should build in flexibility as well as making sure we're all doing what we need to do to keep the supply chain strong.
I think it's a crucial point there that you raise on that kind of frequency of optimization and adjustment. At various points, we've talked to manufacturers about their S&OP, sales and operation planning processes, better integration and frequency on that. So is that, if I can just follow up quickly on that point, Jeff, is that kind of led to immediately a more frequent network optimization and route design? Is it more about that integration between other departments? Just to give us a bit of a snapshot of what are some of the concrete things Toyota is doing on that side?
Good. I thought I lost the video there, but yeah, I think every route's different, right? And again, I think lanes, I guess, depending on if it's inbound from supplier to direct to the plant, those are right, and the efficiency is usually pretty good. But where we really learn the most is on our integrated side and our export, routes that we pick up freight within North America to move externally. So we were looking, the initial design on those were like, 6 weeks out from when we actually expected to, pick up from the supplier or move it. But we did have to implement, a more frequent weekly kind of analysis of how firm that volume was, and, working with the logistics partners as far as, okay, yeah, you have resources assigned, but how much can we flex those assignments, right? And, what cost is that to you versus what, Toyota is really committed to? And, if we really need this amount of resources, here, how can we make that more efficient? So anyway, I think there's a lot of that learning that we've built into our processes that we're looking to carry forward for sure.
Just whilst Jeff has outlined that, Greg, does that also chime with Adient's approach to that? Have you looked to maybe look at those routes and networks a bit more frequently and plan a bit more dynamically in that way?
Yeah, and I think you need to. I think with the uncertainty of what's going to happen in the industry, right? So there's in North America, they're talking about 14, 15 million vehicles next year. If that's the case, you can't just run the same that you've been running, right? Frequencies have to drop, and so we have to be on top of that. We can't wait for our freight bills to come in and for our groups to go to plants and do those truck audits, right? So you have to pretty much look weekly is what we're working on. Looking weekly at our truckload utilization and making sure that we're fully optimized and we're not spending money on air. So the full optimization is a little bit different. That's a bigger beast to take just with our cross stocks and everything. So that's more of a quarterly basis. But I think if the new normal is 15 million vehicles in North America, and it takes to maybe 2024 to get back to pre-COVID levels, then yeah, that we're definitely going to have to look at optimization again as well.
And Ron, if I can turn to you again on the service provider side, in terms of some of the lessons that you are looking to carry forward from this period.
I'll tell you, one of our customers told us that in crisis, bad companies are falling apart, good companies are surviving, and great companies are shining and growing out of it. And I think you have to react very fast. There are opportunities. In our case, we saw how the passenger aircraft are moving to cargo aircraft, how we could utilize the system with charter flights. We had to move very fast. At the same time, diversity is very important. We don't rely only on automotive. Automotive was almost shut down completely in March, April, May. And then we saw a growth in other industries we serve, like in the semiconductor, we saw suddenly a higher demand. So it's important to not to rely only on one industry, but to have more industries and to strengthen your position in critical countries like China, like India. And the relationship, definitely. We tried as much as we could to keep the prices we are committed towards our customers. And at the same time, we were a bit upset with airlines that increased the prices compared to airlines that did not increase the prices, and we remember it for them.
So I knew that my COVID promise would not be fulfilled, and our audience has posed a few questions, so I'm going to turn to them. The first one is addressed to you, Greg, but I think it's something we might want to hear from the other panel on too. But we'll start with Greg. Is how much are you concerned about the impact of local lockdowns, and have you increased safety stocks to accommodate? So, looking at your inventory side and trying to assess that, maybe you can give us a perspective there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we've, I'll say this for kind of the overall on a very generalized basis, but we haven't really increased safety stocks very much. Adient's history in the past couple of years has changed. We have new leadership across the board, basically, and so one of the things that did change was safety stock because we had a very high expedites, and so anything maybe coming from Mexico northbound, we might have a 5-day safety stock. I think it varies. As we're seeing more issues with ocean freight, that conversation's been had. Do we hold more? I mean, obviously we hold more than 5 days for ocean freight, but do we hold more safety stock there? So at this point, there's not been a whole lot of change, post-COVID. But obviously, expedites are costly, and you want to stay out of those as much as possible. So.
Jeff, from an inventory management side, I mean, that was also, again, in the early parts of the crisis, we maybe speculated that this would lead to some changes in inventory management, or even in certain just-in-time side. So whether in the short term, in anticipation of some potential disruption, or more generally, what has Toyota's experience been on that side?
Yeah, I think it's very much as Greg mentioned. We haven't holistically looked to increase, inventory and or lead time. We are constantly watching the east, far east condition. We have a pretty decent lead time there, and so we're pretty comfortable with our inventory there. And I think earlier we talked about Mexico, and maybe supplier by supplier we're making some adjustments, but what we found is if you're a crisis supplier, you probably are low in your inventory in a way, right? And we're just kind of running through the air freight side of things, right? So I think overall we really haven't changed that from a production approach. I think we restarted pretty slow if you look at May and June, but once we hit July and August, I think we saw some of that, I don't know if you call it pressure or whatever, on the supply chain. And I think many of our suppliers are really, again, with manpower and other component issues, they're really struggling to try to keep up with that. And so to ask them to increase inventories on top of it, it would be a really big challenge right now. Going forward, I don't think we're going to make a change either. I wouldn't think so.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, and if those record numbers of charters and shipments that Ron is describing, have anything to suggest, and it wouldn't suggest we're seeing a huge stockpiling of that we have a huge stockpile of parts laying around to prevent sort of disruptions. So there was another question here that was also getting some votes, so I'll turn to it while it's sort of hot topic. It's a question to the panel. Is anyone seeing new collaborations between multiple entities to drive innovation or change in the supply chains? And the example given here is perhaps around data sharing. So I guess, looking, if anyone would talk about how, whether you're collaborating with partners, with your suppliers, or even, maybe across the industry in that way on the data side. So maybe I'll start with you again there, Greg.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we just entered into a new partnership with 3PL, and we implemented that actually as COVID was happening, which brought a new complexity. And so, yeah, we're working with them on some technology, working with them on improving our truckload utilization and our optimization, like we talked about a little bit earlier. And we're looking at, making a data warehouse and collaborating on that data and sharing that data between them and ourselves. So we have it in one good location instead of more manual type reports. So yeah, we are working on that. With how crazy the summer and spring has been, it's not moved as quickly as we would want, and there's more pressing issues. But we'll get there.
I might come back to you on some of those points, but Jeff, what about from Toyota's side? Is this whether, again, with logistic partners or otherwise, for some supply chain innovation?
Yeah, I don't know if some of you were joining, but one of my colleagues, Doug Adams, he leads our advanced planning side, and I think he presented maybe a year ago or so on our supply chain visualization, and so we were already down a path to kind of show and share that information from all the way back through the supply chain to our tier ones, and including packaging and those kind of things. So I think with COVID, we were able to use some of those tools a little more quickly than probably what we would have done previously. But all in all, we're still on that same journey about having connectivity to the supply chain, so we can know when the parts are shipped, as well as we each know along the way where the stagnation points are, or where the gaps are, and including on the return side. That's always a big issue with us and suppliers. So we are on that path, but I don't think it was necessarily because of COVID. It's just what we're trying to do to try to optimize supply chain and improve both of our visibility.
Mm-hmm. And Ron, have you noted? Are you working more in collaboration with either either your customers or carrier partners, kind of in a different way to drive some change and innovation?
Definitely. In some cases, we actually took almost all the supply chain. We took over all the supply chain for some of our customers, helping them, as I mentioned before, moving many air charters and support them on a global level. In some other cases, we join forces or we exchange information with even with competitors, colleagues. We try to source and find more solution and more airlines we could work with. And believe it or not, during this time, we even opened 2 new offices in Malaysia and in Taiwan. So yes, indeed, we share more information. We get more information. We exchange ideas. We speak. I think it's also, we see that this time brings more mergers and acquisitions. And definitely there are many opportunities at this time for collaboration.
Yeah. I wanted to just go back a little bit. I mean, in a way, the topic of let's say, implementation or launch in these crisis periods and stuff is interesting, and it came up in a session earlier with Volvo, who's launched several vehicles, during the pandemic globally. Maybe Greg, just on that point about implementing a new 3PL relationship, which I assume wasn't as a result of COVID. I assume that just fell into it. But how did it change the way that you kind of orchestrated that and across your network?
Yeah, so the change, implementing our 3PL was going to happen before. I mean, we would have done things a little bit different had we had a crystal ball. But so we had a tight timeline anyway. We were implementing, we have 45 plants or so, and we were implementing that within 5 months. And so it was an incredibly tight timeline. And, luckily we went to every plant with a 3PL in January and February to make sure that, all the plants were trained, just getting the face-to-face, which is something obviously post-COVID, I think is definitely a negative is the lack of face-to-face. But that's another topic. So we had that, which actually worked out pretty well. We had separated our launch into 4 phases, and when COVID hit and the shutdown happened, we all got sent home. We were in the middle. We had just finished our second tier of our wave of launch. So we had half the plants that were with our old 3PL and half that were with the new. So it was definitely not ideal. And we basically had to pick up, and our new 3PL had to, understand where all of our trucks were that were in process and understand that. So basically pick up contracts and place them with the new 3PL. So definitely not ideal. It definitely created a lot of complications. But at the same time, it strengthened our relationship, I think, and got us through a major ordeal, which actually, there was some bright side to that.
Interesting. So, and Jeff, if we look at Toyota, I mean, I think there's also been some important activities continuing throughout the pandemic. I mean, there's a joint venture, but there's a new plant being built and coming online, a number of different vehicles. So, when you're looking at your network and how you, again, keep those things moving, even during these sort of times, what sort of strategies did you employ to do that?
Again, I think it goes back to communication. Once we kind of, understood our restart for North America, then we kind of understood what our, supply chain, our pipeline looked like. And, fortunately, we weren't in the situation that Greg was in. We weren't really doing any kind of logistics or systems changes, so we didn't have that to deal with. But obviously, with our production plans, it did impact some of our new vehicle launches and those kind of things. So we, again, we had to look at our pipeline. We had to make decisions about, tooling readiness and those things, and when we could actually implement these planned model launch changes. And for the most part, we again, we were down 10 weeks of production, so you can kind of say, okay, everything kind of moves, but that wasn't always one size fits all, right? We had to kind of go through each one of the conditions, understand the risk, and say, okay, based on that, we all agree as stakeholders here, this is when we're gonna start production on this new vehicle and stuff like that. So it's about communication and understanding where everybody's at, and making sure you have good information to make those decisions.
Okay, great. We have another question here, which has again gotten some votes. It's referring to an unprecedented peak season for ocean freight. So I guess, is that something that you're experiencing, and how are you managing it? So we'll start with the manufacturers and then maybe come to Ron on that. So Greg, you're nodding there. Is that something you recognize, that challenge right now?
Oh yeah, that's been big over the past couple of weeks. We would assume it's going to go on for a few more months. So we're working with the plants to make sure they're aware. I mean, that's the first thing, right? We have to make sure that we are going to see delays. We know it, and we're going to do what we can to make sure everybody's prepared for that. As far as pricing goes, we'll have those negotiations, and we'll work with the carriers and freight forwarders. I think it is important to, not just look in the short term. It's important to look at the long term and understand those relationships. And, I guess I caution, Ron, I guess we'll say, because you're on, but, I caution on the short-sightedness. I mean, it needs to be a partnership. It needs to go both ways. So we'll have those negotiations, and we're not just trying to stick our forwarders with any kind of increases or anything as well. So we're getting into those discussions.
And Jeff, from your side, is that also quite an issue with this peak in ocean freight, and is Toyota managing that with its global carriers in that way?
Yeah, fortunately, I'm a little better condition than Greg, because our Toyota Japan, actually for North American inbound freight, is all managed. The planning and all that's on their side. We get involved once it kind of hits the North American side, and we have to manage disruptions and that kind of thing. And of course, we supply the volume and that thing. But all the commercial discussions and all that happens with Toyota Japan. So I just hear the end of it. I don't have to worry about the negotiation side.
So you're able to defer to Tokyo for that, defer to Japan on that side. So that's Ron. Is that ocean situation? Is that partly what's driving the business your way?
CNW is moving only air transportation, and obviously are focused on the emergency urgent. So in case there are really big delays in ocean, we see some of the freight shifting to the air side. And then, of course, we enjoy it. So we see big traffic in some of the big ports and big delays. And then we see the cargo shifting to air, and then the demand goes higher. That's what happened at the moment, actually.
And of course, I suppose this crunch is a result of some capacity coming out of the market, as well as the kind of economies restarting and moving. I guess that's what's causing this spike in what we would otherwise not sort of see. So I wanted to take, we've got about 7 or so minutes, so just a few more questions, maybe looking ahead. So starting with you, Jeff, we have this audience of actually more than 1,000 people joining this event, supply chain logistics experts. What's some of the areas that you'd want them to help you most in, as you kind of look ahead again in this post-COVID ongoing recovery phase? Where do you need the most help? Not just COVID though, but also, as I said, new models, new networks coming online. What are some areas you'd point to?
Yeah, I mean, it's always bad news first, right? And I think everybody wants to kind of protect and, understand that, hey, I got this under control, even though it's kind of going, haywire or whatever. But, I think, the quicker we are made aware of risk, then we have, I don't know how to say it exactly, but we have maybe some resources that we can support with if maybe based on our commercial situation or whatever, that it's, the sooner we know about it, the more we're likely to help both of us out, so definitely bad news first, and don't be hesitating to share that. And, I think we talked a little bit about the, visualization. So as we're building these tools, right, that, really in our mind, it's for both of us, and so, it's just some really good frank discussion about how they can help your side of the business, as well as, if we have better visibility, to, your docs or whatever. So we understand that risk sometimes if there is a lack of communication. So just be open about that. And, as we roll out these additional tools, just, again, it's all about, trying to make sure that we're both getting benefit from it. So.
Great. Yeah. Greg, what about from you?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we're going through some changes in our network as far as a little bit of our supply base, carrier base, but our freight network, and what we're really interested in is building relationships. I mean, we have a lot of good relationships with a lot of carriers, and we're interested in solidifying those. We have some good volumes, we have good frequencies, we're consistent. I think we would be an asset to any carrier. And then also, along with that is data. We're always interested in improving our data, which improves our visibility into our network. So that's going to be a big thing for us in 2021.
Great, and Ron, perhaps a little bit the other way. Where do you think your customers can, look to improve, their supply chains, in maybe more collaboration with providers like CNW?
I think we all recognize that keeping inventory in different sites can be very expensive. And especially when you have a situation of crisis. So I think that centralizing more inventory in less points and then move it by air freight can be sometimes cheaper than keep inventory in different locations, but multiple pieces of inventory. And second thing, I think people will have to see the supplier base and not to rely only on one country, maybe to spread the suppliers for different countries and be prepared for the crisis that comes. At the same time, of course, keeping some level of needed, but I know that our customers are trying to avoid situation where inventory is on the way while you have a crisis, and suddenly, even if it arrives, you have nothing to do with it. So they try to avoid it to reduce the time from the order till you get the inventory or your order. So to reduce the supply time.
Okay, so that's just some interesting tips there to consider and different inventory approaches. Let's finish on a little bit of looking a bit further ahead. So, Greg, I'll start with you. If we were to kind of fast forward 2025, and in the view of some changing technologies, businesses, etc., what do you think for your supply chain logistics? What's something you really hope that you will be key to have developed, implemented, achieved by then? If we're looking 5 years down the line.
That's interesting. I guess I would just say improve technology. I mean, the data is critical, and it's something that we lack, and we lack into that visibility. And so, we should have I would like a better automated system as far as into the visibility into our network, whether it's our cross docks, whether it's our truckloads. I think that would help us immensely.
It does seem, and obviously we talk about this often, what we can see on a smartphone when we order and the visibility, it does seem that it's time in our supply chains to get to that point. We know that there's lots of complicated reasons why it's not. Hopefully by 2025, we can get there. Jeff, is there anything from Toyota in terms of, what you can see coming down the pike in terms of what you hope to achieve in 2025?
Yeah, I think the technology piece is a really good point. I think as I think about that question, freight costs just every year just continually to rise, and I think we're all challenged with that, whether you're an OEM or, a tier supplier, even a logistics partner, so I think if we can get some clarity about the infrastructure and, the alternative fuels and the driver resources and maybe more people want to be a truck driver or something like that, I think just as the industry moves forward over the next 5 years, then how do we leverage that? And ideally, if the infrastructure is there, then we have some really good path towards some cost reductions. Is what I would say.
Okay, great. And Ron, to close, what about from your side? It's 2025.
Definitely, technology is the key. Maybe we'll have some drones moving freight, or I don't know, different kind of development. But I think also all the issue of customs and trade needs to be more developed in countries like India or Brazil and in Argentina, in Russia. We would like to see that it is easier, that they make it easier to trade with, and markets are opening. And again, at the end of the day, it's moving freight faster from point to point.
Okay, great. Well, some views for the future that would maybe we hope we don't even have to wait 5 years for, but at least hopefully by then. I think in 5 years' time, supply chain capacity and optimization won't have gone away either as a topic. I'm sure we'll be talking more about that.
The visibility is very important. The visibility that
absolutely
that goes together.
Absolutely. Well, that is definitely a common thread that we hear from our panel. So I just want to, as we close here, thank again each of our panelists for their insight. Jeff Estes from Toyota, Greg Megerian from Adient, and Ron Glowinsky from CNW. Some really interesting insight here and on an important topic. So thanks for your time there. For all of you watching, do please keep with us. We've got more coming up after a short break, including on finished vehicle logistics and a great session later on leadership in the supply chain. Also, just a reminder to take advantage of the networking tools on the platform. If you haven't already, visit some of the e-booth stands and also set up your matchmaking and respond to some requests and set up some meetings. Use those tools which are available. It's really a great way to connect with the audience and delegates that we have here. As I mentioned, there's something like 1,100 plus people registered and around this event from around the world. So really fantastic opportunities. I really encourage you to take advantage of the tool while it's there. But that's it for me for now. Christopher Ludwig. We'll be back after a break. And thanks again to the panel, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.